As promised, today I'm going to talk about how to shoot with a 16 to 35 millimeters zoom lens. I'll talk about why this is one of my favorite lenses, but don't worry, I'll also mention some of its weaknesses, and then I'll leave you with some tips for shooting with your 16 to 35. I'm Brenda Bergering, giving you practical photography advice to complement Mark's gear reviews from our real-world experience as a husband and wife photo video team. Hit subscribe, it helps us out. So first, why a 16 to 35? This is one of my favorite lenses because of what it allows me to do. Your favorite lens will probably depend on what you like to shoot most. As outdoor wedding photographers and adventurous storytellers, we shoot a lot of storytelling and landscape style images. The 35 millimeter focal length, as I talked about in a previous video, is a great storytelling focal length. It's wide enough to capture the scene without creating distracting distortion. It's also great for environmental portraits. But sometimes Mark and I are taking landscape portraits, similar to environmental portraits, but the subject is often smaller. There's a person in the landscape rather than the person in front of the environment. I'm not sure if that's a technical difference between environmental portraits and landscape portraits, but it's kind of an important difference in the way that we shoot and the way we talk about our photography. Basically, sometimes the 35 millimeter focal length isn't wide enough to capture the grandeur of a place. I want to show how epic the mountains are or how vast the sky is. And so shooting wider, such as 24 or 16 millimeters, allows me to take a photo that's a little more dramatic than what I can do with my 35. And so with the 16 to 35, I have the versatility to shoot anywhere from 16 millimeters to 35 millimeters. So one big weakness of the 16 to 35 is that it requires the photographer to use a lot of strength, meaning this lens is bulky and heavy. Not really, but at least compared to the 35 millimeter prime lens, this lens doesn't fit as well in a smaller camera bag or if I'm trying to be incognito just out and about with my family. It gets heavy if I'm carrying it all day at a wedding or out on a long hike. We're big fans of light and compact gear, but the reality is that there are two lenses that are worth their weight some of the time. And that's the 70 to 200 and the 16 to 35. So these are two of our favorite zoom lenses. Another thing to note about the 16 to 35 might be obvious, but it doesn't do much in terms of depth of field or bokeh. You also can't achieve any background compression. So if you only ever shoot with your 16 to 35, your images won't have any noticeable focal length variety, like if you add in some photos with the 70 to 200. Additionally, because it's a zoom lens, the low aperture version can be expensive. So if shooting in low light is really important to you, that will be a factor. However, when I'm shooting weddings, I will often add some off-camera flash as the light gets lower anyway. Lastly, the 16 to 35 can result in some distortion if you're not careful. So you need to make sure you keep your subjects away from the edge of the frame, and any architectural elements need to stay level so they don't end up looking super wacky. It's important to be square and level unless you're trying to exaggerate something. So if you want to give your subject hobbit feet, make sure you put your subject right at the edge of the frame and shoot at 16 millimeters. Now let's talk through some tips for shooting with your 16 to 35. If you've watched any of my videos, you might already know what I'm going to start with. If you haven't, make sure to hit subscribe. You always want to zoom with your feet. Choose your focal length based on the image you want to create, not by simply spinning the zoom ring. So sure, there are times when you might want to shoot at 35, but you can't get back far enough in a tight space indoors to capture the full scene of what you're trying to shoot. So in that case, you might just zoom until you can capture everything you need with minimal distortion. After all, that versatility is one of the awesome things about this lens. But generally, it's important to move your body around. So choose your foreground, middle ground, and background intentionally. After that, and I've already mentioned this, but make sure there's nothing near the edges of the frame that you're worried about being distorted at the wider focal lengths. You'll want your subject closer to the middle of your frame. If you're going to shoot super wide, like at 16 millimeters, composition gets even more important. Because of the distortion and the complete lack of compression, if you don't anchor your subject with a foreground or a horizon line or leading lines or something, it will just look like a wide stretched out image. So if you want epic, you need even your wide shots to tell a story somehow and keep your subject from getting lost in the frame. And composition techniques will help with that. This is where you have to put in the extra work to get high, get low, get near, get far, and really frame something interesting up. Another tip, if you're shooting landscape style images outdoors, is to try shooting with a polarizer to cut the glare on things in the environment. Things like water, the sky, leaves. The polarizer can cut the glare and increase the vibrance of your images. Just be careful when shooting super wide because it can create a dark blob in the sky at certain angles from the sun. And so when trying to bring out the blue of the sky, you end up making the sky look kind of weird. If you want to see a video about tips for shooting with the polarizer, leave a note in the comments below and let us know. And one other tip for making your subject pop in these wide images shot with your 16-35 is to use light. That can mean natural light or artificial light, but using light to highlight your subject and make them stand out from the landscape helps to draw the viewer's eye. You can also do subject masking in your post-production to help with this, but we like to try to get a lot of our photography done in the camera. So what do you think? Do you see why I love the 16-35 lens so much? And based on what you love to shoot, what's your favorite lens? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.